Here we go. What's up, potheads and political junkies? You're watching Cannabis Culture News live. I'm Jeremiah. Hopefully it's working here. Friday afternoon, we seem to have some trouble with live stream these days, but it seems to be working for everybody. Now I can see myself. If you guys can see and hear me, let me know in the chat room. I have Mr. Marius sitting here with me.
Greetings.
So a lot of stuff on the show today. No guests, just a bunch of videos to play for you guys. There's a couple crazy things going on both north and south of our U.S.-Canada border. Of course, if you live in Canada, you've probably heard by now that Bill C-10 has passed the House of Commons with a conservative majority sitting. It wasn't that hard, wasn't that difficult. The bill that they've had trouble passing through their different minority governments over the past few years is finally through the House now. So, and this time they're not proroguing Parliament or anything like that. So it goes to the Senate now to be voted on. And actually, a conservative member of the Senate said she expects the bill will be stuck there for a little while. So it probably won't be passed quite yet, but they have until March. That's when the 100-day deadline is up that they'd set. So they expect to pass that in the Senate within 100 days here. We'll see what happens. Looks like everything's working. You guys all good there? Freezing a bit, somebody said. You know, it's strange. We've had some internet issues that have been ongoing for the past few weeks. We're not sure exactly what it is. We don't know if it's because live stream has changed something or if all of a sudden our own house internet is really messed up. It seems to be worse on Fridays, but we're going to continue to investigate. We do have an appointment with Shaw, our cable provider, to come and do their own investigation to see what's up. All the rest of the internet works fine. It's just live stream, so we don't know what's going on. Anyways, I thought we would quickly, just off the top of the show, talk a little bit also about what's coming up, and that's the Fast and Furious scandal. And also, the DEA has now been caught laundering money to Mexican drug cartels. So, the Fast and Furious scandal basically was a gun-running operation that was exposed not too long ago, in I guess towards the end of last year. And it basically came out that the U.S. government between 2009 and 2010 had been running guns to Mexican drug cartels, making them available, thousands of them, sending them down to Mexico, and pretend, I guess what they were trying to do is track them, but they just let them go. They all went down there and they couldn't track them. And some of the guns ended up killing some border agents, or at least one border agent, and other ones have been linked to other crimes. So Obama's Attorney General, Eric Holder, has come under a lot of fire recently because of all of this, and they've actually been calling for his resignation. And we're going to play you guys some videos. He was sitting in front of the Congress this week getting battered by all of these guys. And it's pretty interesting to see him squirming and struggling and basically lying his way out of it. So we've got videos of that to play. Also videos of the new revelation about the DEA actually laundering millions of dollars for the drug cartels as well. So, and if you want to know more about this stuff, there's a really great story on the front page of Cannabis Culture right now that's about Celerino Castillo, who is a former DEA agent who's actually in jail right now, who is basically, we think, framed and sent to jail because he exposed a drug-running scam of the DEA, or it was the Bush administration at the time. He exposed that even before 2009. He was talking about that. He was quickly sent to jail in a case that looks very dubious. The person who was his lawyer was under investigation himself in a similar case with drug running, and his son was under investigation. And so there was a lot of questions there whether he was actually given a fair trial. So if you go to the front page of Cannabis Culture right now, there is an article about that. Celerino Castillo, check out his story. And there's actually a great interview in that article from Mark, done on Pot TV, with Celerino, back before he was actually sent to prison for these ridiculous gun charges. Basically what happened is he was selling guns at a gun show, and there was some minor thing, or he hadn't done the paperwork properly, and that's what they got him on. So it's pretty scary stuff. I'm just going to bring up my storyboard here. Marius, you also had some stuff that you wanted to talk about before we get into the videos. And do you want to go over that stuff while I'm searching here?
Oh, sure. Well, a couple of weeks ago, there was a story, excuse me, of the Hartfield Hospital study at the University of Iowa, They ran a 3-year study with simulators on the effects of marijuana and driving. Their conclusions, and we have the story on CC, is that there was little impact on driving, and that drivers tended to be more cautious, and were also aware of their inebriation. Recently, a PhD, Dr. Kevin A. Sabot, wrote a rebuttal on the Huffington Post. He's connected with a site called thefix.com. So if you want to see an antithesis of cannabis culture and pot TV, go to thefix.com because they just want to stop all drug use. I think they're working on a time machine to go back to Prohibition era and prevent it from failing. I don't know what they're doing, but it's pretty humorous there. And he does, however, cite several studies. One was from the Journal of Studies for Alcohol and Drug Use. This was a U.S. study, and even it did find that cannabis users in crashes, there was a significant number of them. However, it lumped in cannabinoids with other stimulants and said that most of the crashes were caused by the other stimulants. So this particular link to this study is, makes you wonder if he's grasping at straws. He also pointed to another study done by the University of Auckland in New Zealand, and it did link crashes to heavily stoned users who had just smoked. Oddly enough, not people who had just smoked and weren't heavy users, but those that were chronic users. And well, I'm not going to say whether I'll save my opinion for the end. Another study he cited was an epidemiologic study, and what epidemiology is a study of statistics in relation to public health. And all they said from the study is that there was a significant increase for pot users to have caused accidents, but it doesn't actually give a number. Now, besides attacking the Hartfield study for not including these conclusions, which seem to me slightly shady, because even the University of Auckland study said it was done on a small group of people, and not many of them were pot users, which is, how can you study city living from a small town? It's just not feasible.
Right.
So I gave these studies a fair read, and I'd also like to point out to Mr. Sabot, if he's listening, which I doubt it.
He watches the show every week.
He has ignored many other studies over the years. The first one was from October of 1998. The Transport Ministry of South Africa and the University of Adelaide found that driving people that were driving under the influence of cannabis caused slightly less accidents than people who were completely sober. They did, however, point out that 90% of accidents were caused by alcohol if there was a drug involved. The United States, exactly. That's everybody should know by now the effects of alcohol and driving. And if there's one thing that the police are doing more or less correctly, is to try to get the drunk drivers off the road.
Right.
It also, however, Dr. Sabot ignored 1983 U.S. National Highway Transportation and Safety Administration studies using simulators that found, again, that drug drivers, when the drug was marijuana, caused less accidents, were aware of their intoxications, and thus erred on the side of caution. They found that people with alcohol were not aware of their intoxication and would err on the side of recklessness, which makes sense for all these accidents. But these similar conclusions were done by the National Highways, NISTA, I'll say. In 1993, there was a University of Toronto in 1999, which I'd just be repeating the same conclusions, that marijuana users were aware of their impairment,
right,
and drove more cautiously. Now, it's not that oh, go out and get high and smoke dope, because there have been other studies that say that if you're stoned, you're twice as likely or more to get into an accident, regardless. Just because you might be driving safer, you're still impaired, and just because you're aware of your impairment does not mean that you're not going to get into an accident.
yeah.
So
Reaction time, you can imagine if somebody else swerved off the road or something, you might not be as quick to actually maneuver out of the way.
precisely.
But of your own accidents, I mean, when you're smoking pot, you're like driving slow, making sure nobody's watching. Yeah, you know.
It's not something that significant police resources should go after if you go by the science. It's alcohol, and there's so many factors with alcohol, including the fact that prohibition limits it to the only social drug that's acceptable in society. If you go downtown and you want to do any other kinds of drugs in a club, you're kicked out promptly.
Yeah.
So
Interesting stuff, though. That's cool. Thanks a lot, Marius, for the info on the study. And, it's true, though. I mean, this has been going on for years and years and years. These studies always come out, and you always see there's a couple newspaper articles about them.
That's right. The science is in on this already. It's being done.
But, again, it's one of those issues that it's a tough one to win, because nobody wants to be, dealing with any kind of impairment on the road, no matter what it is, even if the evidence says, well, they might be safer. It's still a sort of politically contentious issue.
Precisely, and that's why I gave that caveat at the end.
Yes.
If you're going to smoke marijuana, best treat it like any other medication. Do not operate heavy machinery, and a car, I'm afraid, is a heavy machine.
Right. Now, I have to admit that I've been driving since I haven't driven for the past few years, but before that I drove from the time I was 16 years old. And there wasn't a heck of a lot of time that I wasn't stoned when I was driving, because I'm just high all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think really if I stopped smoking and then driven, I'd be not myself, you might say.
Yeah, it's true. It's true that you're more aware of how impaired you are. So if you're a heavy user and you feel that you're not impaired, you're likely that you're not really impaired. But it's really hard to say. I'm sure it's down to the individual. And do whatever, if you're a heavy user, do whatever feels the safest, is all I can say.
Awesome. Excellent, Marius. And it's getting close to 4:20 here. Oh, it looks like we have 2 minutes. So what I'm going to do is basically, I want to get into these videos fairly quickly, because I have so many different ones to play for you guys. And there's a lot to cover. We probably will go over an hour today. We'll see what happens, because I do have so much. But I'll try and, some of the videos we won't watch all the way through, just to speed things up a little bit. But before we do that, Fast and Furious, I'm going to set this up for you guys. Obviously, the U.S. government shipping guns down to Mexico is a really, really horrible thing. And, oh, Marijuana Man's in the house.
Getting us smoked.
Ah, I see. Yeah, it's really, right now, causing some stir in the U.S., and it's caused so much stir because it is such a crazy thing, it's such a big issue, that Attorney General Holder has been forced to answer to the rest of the politicians there in the States, and he's been sitting through a grilling from a bunch of Republican and other officials, and it's just crazy to watch this footage, to watch Eric Holder, the Obama's Attorney General, mumble, stutter through things, not have any real answers for any of the questions, and you can even see it on his face when he's saying this stuff. He's like smiling, laughing. You know when somebody's lying. And I mean, on this guy's face, it is painted all over it. It's just unbelievable when you really see this footage. Before we get into the actual footage of him being grilled, I'm just going to play a couple short news clips here to set things up and give you guys some of the latest. But first, it's just about 4:20, so let's hit this bong up. And now, It looks like it's 4:19. I don't know if that clock, how accurate that is. Let's double check our
It's
clocks
4:20
here.
on my computer.
It's 4:20 over there. Well, it's 4:20 somewhere then. Yes, and there it is. 4:20 on my iPhone.
I think about a minute too. So.
All right. And Marius, are you gonna hit the bong as well? You're a bong guy.
Sure. Yes.
All right.
Yes, I do like the bong. I'm more of a joint person, but bong rips have a special place in my lungs.
Me too. And this is pretty nice weed too. Somebody said I really need to clean this bowl, and I do. It's filthy. It's disgusting. I'm sorry.
It does affect the taste.
It does. At least the rest of the bong is fairly clean and not black and disgusting. All right. So
I may have to read.
oh no, here we definitely need to reload you. You don't want to smoke that. My goodness, my goodness. See, this is usually, I don't know how people do it out there, but
I was trying to recycle.
we always try and give a bong rip each. So you don't really share a bong rip. Once you hit that bowl, you load a new one for the next person who's going to hit it. And the simple reason for doing that is because when you heat the bowl up the first time, even if you don't smoke all the plant matter that's there, you got to imagine this hot smoke going through the entire bowl is vaporizing most of the THC that's there. So even if there's still a bit of plant material left in the bowl afterwards, once it gets to that level of heat, you're probably not going to have a lot of the crystals or THC there. So you're just smoking plant. That's right. Proper bong etiquette, says Rufus in the chat. That's the way it's done. All right, so we're going to start off with a clip from Fox News. Now, it's funny because Fox News actually, if you go to YouTube and you type in Fast and Furious, you'll find a whole bunch of stuff from Fox. And it's because anything that they can use to attack the Democrats, of course, is going to be all over the place on Fox. And a scandal of this size, of course, they cannot pass up. And they're doing everything they can. It's funny to see the Republican network really like grilling politicians or really challenging what the government's doing. You don't really see it that often, especially under Republican leadership. Fox News goes the opposite direction. But this actually, Judge Napolitano, he's always great on Fox. He's probably the best guy there. He's a libertarian, and he's really does a lot of challenging of the status quo and authority, that kind of stuff. So it's just, this one's a really short one. Check out what he has to say about the lake.
The Attorney General could be impeached for violating the law. And this Attorney General is in some hot water because he acknowledged misleading the Congress. He says it wasn't intentional, therefore he says it wasn't a lie. They didn't put him under oath at the time. Sometimes, as you know, they forget to administer the oath, therefore it wasn't perjury. Tell that to Roger Clemens. This is basically the same thing his Justice Department is prosecuting Roger Clemens for, misleading the Congress. This is more serious because he is the chief law enforcement officer of the land, because this committee of Congress is the committee to which he is obliged under the law to be responsive to, and his responses were inaccurate.
Yeah, but he wouldn't be impeached because the House is controlled by the Republicans, but the Senate's controlled by the Democrats.
It's unlikely that an impeachment would be successful. It's also unlikely that it would proceed. I would think the president would fire him. The president does not want an impeachment in an election year.
But the president has been clear that he stands behind Eric
Yes,
Holder.
they are longtime friends.
After you heard the testimony yesterday, can he still say that?
No. I think someone will have to, as they say, go under the bus. It might be Eric Holder. It might be Lanny Brewett.
Live stream coming out of these clips. Hold on, I'm going to turn this down. Yeah, it doesn't want to respond properly. Every time we come out of a clip or do anything, I hope it doesn't plague us with that the entire show, because I got a lot of clips to play for you guys. But I'm thinking I might have to open two windows and bounce back and forth from one to the other. Sorry about this, guys. I really don't know how to explain it. But so that was just a quick one. Let's go back to my storyboard here. Of course, every time that happens, I have to reopen all my stuff. Okay, so the next clip I have for you is actually one from a few months ago. This is a little news clip from CNN of them pointing out something that's very interesting about this whole Fast and Furious timeline, because Eric Holder came out when it first happened and said he had just heard about it, and I guess Obama talked about it a little bit earlier, and CNN's asking, well, how did he know? So let's check this out, and hopefully I'll be back on the other side.
Well, Congressman Cummings, let's get to one of the questions here. Let's first listen to the Attorney General. He came before this committee back in May. Here's what he said.
When did you first know about the program, officially I believe called Fast and Furious? To the best of your knowledge, what date?
I'm not sure the exact date, but I probably heard about Fast and Furious for the first time over the last few weeks.
He says over the last few weeks. That is on May 3rd, 2011. Listen to this interview the President of the United States, not the Attorney General, the President of the United States had with CNN Espanol back in March.
There have been problems. I heard on the news about this story that Fast and Furious, where allegedly guns were being run into Mexico, and ATF knew about it but didn't apprehend those who had sent it. Eric Holder, the Attorney General, has been very clear that he knew nothing about this. We've assigned a IG, Inspector General, to investigate it.
It begs the question, how did the President know about this in March, and how did the President know the Attorney General knew nothing about this in March when the Attorney General says in May he just learned about it a couple weeks ago?
I think the Attorney General will clear that up, but the fact still remains that the Attorney General sent to our committee a lengthy letter just this weekend explaining the situation, and I think that needs to be cleared up.
We came back. Woo.
Sometimes it works.
Sometimes it does. Yeah, so these guys, obviously something doesn't make sense here. And it gets worse over time, as you see in the clips. There's other lies that are exposed here. Here's another one. This is just another real quick one that kind of goes into a little bit more detail and explains things. Here, check it out.
When the government's so-called Fast and Furious program was created, the idea was to allow illegal guns to be shipped into Mexico so investigators could trace where they were going and get a better handle on where Mexico's criminal cartels were operating. But the program has been a disaster. The guns have been linked to killings of Mexican officials, and now it appears that Attorney General Eric Holder knew a lot more about it than he recently told Congress. Here's Cheryl Atkinson.
New documents obtained by CBS News show Attorney General Eric Holder was sent briefings on the controversial Fast and Furious operation as far back as July 2010. That directly contradicts his statement to Congress. Listen to what Holder told a Judiciary Committee hearing on May 3rd this year.
I'm not sure the exact date, but I probably heard about Fast and Furious for the first time over the last few weeks.
Yet internal Justice Department documents show that at least 10 months before that hearing, Holder began receiving frequent memos discussing Fast and Furious. They came from the head of the National Drug Intelligence Center and Assistant Attorney General Lanny Brewer. In Fast and Furious, ATF agents allegedly allowed thousands of weapons to cross the border and fall into the hands of Mexican drug cartels. It's called letting guns walk, and it remained secret to the public until Border Patrol agent Brian Terry was murdered last December. 2 guns from Fast and Furious were found at the scene, and ATF agent John Dodson blew the whistle on the operation. Ever since, the Justice Department has publicly tried to distance itself. But the new documents leave no doubt that high-level justice officials knew guns were being walked. 2 Justice Department officials mulled it over in an email exchange October 18, 2010. It's a tricky case given the number of guns that have walked, but is a significant set of prosecution, says Jason Weinstein, Deputy Assistant Attorney General of the Criminal Division. Deputy Chief of the National Gang Unit James Trusty replies, "I'm not sure how much grief we get for guns walking. It may be more like, finally, they're going after people who sent the guns down there."
Now, the Justice Department told CBS News that the officials in those emails were talking about an entirely different case started before Eric Holder became Attorney General. And tonight they tell CBS News Holder misunderstood that question from Congress, that he did know about Fast and Furious, just not the details. Bob.
Okay, thank you very much, Cheryl.
He knew, but he didn't know. Yeah, these guys, man. Watch him squirm, though, in these next clips. It's almost painful to watch this guy under the gun. I was shocked at how poorly he really did. I thought maybe he'd be better than this, but this is entertaining, to say the least. It's, of course, such a horrible thing, though. These guys should immediately be fired. Like, they're talking about impeaching him now, of course. I doubt that'll happen because the Democrats have so much control over things. But Obama should immediately fire this guy. And, of course, I think this should be maybe Obama already did know about this. Maybe he's implicated in this stuff, too. And, of course, the long history of the U.S. government helping out drug cartels, and, you know, it goes back a long way. So it's not just Obama and this government. The intelligence community is probably intertwined with these gangs more than we think.
Yeah, there's so much CIA involvement in Mexico and South America over decades.
Yeah.
Who knows what the story is underneath it all.
Right. And of course, we talked a little bit about this on Marijuana Man's Wednesday show. Look up Gary Webb and the reporting he did before he committed suicide by shooting himself twice in the head.
Back of the head.
Yeah. Shocking stuff, what he uncovered about the U.S. government and drug gangs. Anyways, check out this clip. This stuff is crazy. I got a couple of these. I'll see you on the other side.
The gentleman yields back. We now recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Poe, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. General, the way I see the Fast and Furious operation, based on all the information that I've received, is that the United States government, Justice Department, ATF, were aware of a situation where guns could be bought in the United States, serious weapons, automatic, semi-automatic, sniper rifles, bought by straw purchasers and were observed by federal authorities, wanted to watch the guns go to Mexico, go to the drug cartels, and see where they ended up. Here's how it ended up. 2,000 weapons, based upon the information that we've received from your department. 600 of those weapons are accounted for. The vast majority are not accounted for. We don't know what country they're in and who's got them. But this operation is serious to me because people died with this ill-founded decision. We talk about the two Americans, the two agents, one Brian Terry, Jaime Zapata in Mexico, the two agents, but at least 200 Mexican nationals died too because of the United States watching these weapons, knowing where they were going, and lose those weapons. Mexican government that hasn't said a whole lot about this other than at least 200 Mexican nationals. Those Mexican nationals that were murdered because of our watching this illegal conduct are just as important as the two Americans that were murdered as well. And that's why this is a serious discussion. You're the Attorney General, you're a lawyer, former judge, prosecutor, you're the head guy in the United States when it comes to the Justice Department and law enforcement. My understanding is you didn't really know about the operation. The memos, you might have gotten the memo, didn't read the memo, or didn't read all the memo, not sure about that. But you're the person in charge of this, and believing that you were unaware of Operation Fast and Furious requires, to coin a phrase, a willing suspension of disbelief. It's hard for me to believe that you were unaware of this operation that went to Mexico. Now, my question is very simple. Who is the person in the United States government that made the decision of an Operation Fast and Furious to facilitate the guns going to Mexico? Who is that one person?
We don't know yet.
So you don't know who was responsible for the conduct of these thousands of guns going to Mexico? We don't know who that is?
We know that the case was opened in the ATF office in Phoenix a month or so before it was opened in the U.S. Attorney's office in Phoenix. We know that it was given OCDF status sometime after that. But we do not know as yet who the particular person was, to the extent it is a person, in either of those offices that said this is the way in which this operation, this flawed operation, should be conducted.
So we don't know the person that signed off. I mean, I don't know how the federal government works. Everybody's got to sign off on something, especially something like this. But we don't know who that person is yet. Is that what you're telling me?
With all due respect, I'd be surprised if we're going to see a document that somebody signed off on that said you can let guns walk. I'd be surprised if we see something like that.
Would you agree that?
But I don't know. I don't know.
We don't know. We don't know who was in charge of making that final, it's time to send the guns to the enemy of Mexico, the drug dealers. which is phenomenal to me. It's a violation, I understand, of international law to allow gun trafficking to go between two countries. Do you agree with that?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it would depend. I mean, as you look at
people in one country are smuggling guns to another country. Isn't that a violation of international law?
Well, I don't know, but international. I was going to say, if you look at Operation Wide Receiver, if the governments agree that weapons can go from one country to another, I would not think that violates international law.
If they agree. That's the key.
Right.
Did the Mexican government agree to Operation Fast and Furious?
Not the way in which it was, not in the way it was actually carried out.
The way it turned out.
But
would you agree this operation was reckless? It's a reckless operation on the part of the United States?
I mean, I think the way it was carried out, I would certainly say it was flawed, reckless. Yeah, I'd probably agree with that. I mean, it was done inappropriately, and it's had tragic consequences, and is going, as I said in my opening statement, it's going to continue to have tragic consequences.
More people are going to die, probably.
Unfortunately, I think that's probably true.
A person recklessly causes the death of another person under many state law, including Texas, where some of these guns were bought. It's manslaughter. It's a crime. And it's my belief that if the United States government helped facilitate reckless homicide, reckless killing of other people, this is a serious matter. And there may be people in our government, Justice Department, the ATF, that if they help facilitate reckless conduct that caused the death of an individual in the United States or in Mexico by sending these guns down there, they should be held criminally responsible for that conduct. Are you going as far as the Attorney General to make sure that if criminal violations were committed by anyone in our government, that you're going to prosecute those people?
Sure. If we find that there were criminal violations connected to the conduct of Fast and Furious, I will commit that we will take those findings seriously, and that people will be prosecuted. Now, when I said reckless before, I was talking about the way in which the operation itself was conducted. I don't want to cast too wide a net here and say that on the basis of what we know now, that there is a basis to conclude that people connected to Fast and Furious, either at the ATF in Phoenix or in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Phoenix, would necessarily have the requisite state of mind or done things that would bring them under the ambit.
Reclaiming my time. I know that's not what you're saying. That's what I was saying. I was saying
the gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you very much. And I request unanimous consent to submit further questions to the Attorney General and have answers in writing.
Without objection. Thank you, Mr. Poe. The gentlewoman from California, Ms. True, is recognized.
Mr. Attorney General, before I begin with my questions, I'd like to thank you for
All right. And you might notice that these few videos that have been clipped out from C-SPAN have a little logo in the corner that says moxnews.com. Go check Mox News out. It's awesome. That guy is so great. He clips these videos all out from all over the place, the mainstream media. He must have his PVRs running 24 hours a day, and he gets everything, tons of great videos. And they keep shutting him down, actually. His last page, where all the videos are based, the last several have been repeatedly attacked by YouTube and other people with copyright claims and that kind of stuff. And actually, the last one is now shut down. He's waiting to get information back to see if they'll allow it to stay. But he's, of course, got his replacement site up already. So, and that's where these C-SPAN clips are coming from. So we're going to go right into the next one here and watch some more of Eric Holder.
you back.
Thanks you, Ms. True. The gentleman from Utah, Mr. Chaffetz, is recognized.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Attorney General, for being here. Have you spoken to Secretary Napolitano about Fast and Furious?
No.
Have you spoken with Secretary Clinton about Fast and Furious?
No.
Have you spoken to President Obama about Fast and Furious?
I don't think that I have. I see the President.
That's okay. If you haven't, you haven't. Have you spoken to the President of Mexico about Fast and Furious?
No.
Have you spoken to the Attorney General of Mexico about Fast and Furious?
I don't believe so.
You have routinely argued that you've been oblivious and disengaged in this operation, and I buy that to a large extent.
I'm not sure.
But we have a dead Border Patrol agent in Agent Terry. We have 2,000 missing guns. We have 200 deaths in Mexico. We had dead government officials in Mexico. We have a Mexican helicopter with troops in it that shot, 3 of which are wounded back in May of this year. We have 50-plus members of Congress calling for your resignation over this, and you've never spoken to any one of these people about this operation.
Well, first off, the notion that I am somehow oblivious to this matter is totally belied by these inconvenient things called the facts.
You took 5 days to go to the Caribbean. You didn't have 15 minutes to call Secretary Clinton, Napolitano, talk to the president or your counterparts in Mexico?
Understand something with regard to Secretary Napolitano. Our agencies have been in constant touch with each other about this issue because we are engaged, both of us, in the prosecution of the killer of...
Okay, so if you were intimately involved and engaged in this, remember, Agent Terry was killed in December, mid-December, and then we had Jaime Zapata, who was killed in Mexico, 2 officers shot in February 15th. On February 16th, you and Secretary Napolitano issued a press release that's titled, Secretary Napolitano and Attorney General Holder form a joint task force to assist Mexico's investigation into yesterday's shooting of 2 ICE agents in Mexico. At the very beginning of this press release, Secretary of Homeland Security Janet Napolitano and Attorney General Eric Holder today met to discuss this issue. And how is it that you and Secretary Napolitano said you never even talked or discussed, even brought up or had any discussion about Fast and Furious?
The press release that you talk about is not a Fast and Furious matter.
But
so you have to understand something, the way Washington works here, okay? The reality is that when it comes to matters that are under investigation...
But the death of Jaime Zapata was highly likely, that came from Fast and Furious. In fact, from testimony that we took from Agent Forcelli, and I'm going to read from this, is from January 8th of 2011. Quote, and there was this sense, like every other time, even with Miss Gifford's shooting, there was a state of panic, like, oh my God, let's hope that this is not a weapon from that case. And the shooting of Mr. Zapata down in Mexico, I know that, again, that state of panic that they had, like, please let this not come back. So the agents on the ground were so concerned that this is going to happen. You and Secretary Napolitano have a discussion, and there's no discussion about even the possibility of Fast and Furious?
There is the meaningful conversations that happen between DHS and DOJ happen at lower levels between investigators.
But when you and what did you and Secretary Napolitano talk about if you didn't talk about Fast and Furious, and it's the day after Jaime Zapata, and you were very quick to issue press releases?
Well, you're making an assumption that in fact is a Fast and Furious case. I'm not sure that...
We didn't know at the time. You didn't know at the time. I didn't know. Nobody knew at the time. Isn't it a reasonable assumption to suggest that it may have been guns from Fast and Furious that happened, that caused that death?
Given the fact that there are, over the course of the last 5 years, 64,000 weapons that have gone from the United States to Mexico.
I have a hard time believing, Mr. Attorney General, with all due respect, my time is short. Twice, the President of the United States has gone before the American people and said that you had nothing to do with this, you weren't involved in it, you weren't engaged in it, yet you said you've never spoken to the President. How is it that he would know that you haven't been involved, you weren't involved in this, and he can make such a claim if you've never even spoken to him about it?
Well, the President gets information from the Justice Department in a variety of ways. We interact with the White House counsel's office very frequently. I don't know exactly what the flow of information is within the White House, but he can find out about my state of involvement in matters connected to the Justice Department without speaking directly to...
Let me move on to you have access to, obviously, the emails of Dennis Burke. On Wednesday, November 24th, 2010, he sent an email. It said, quote, some of the weapons bought by these clowns in Arizona have been directly traced to murders of elected officials in Mexico by the cartels. So, Katie, bar the door when we unveil this baby, end quote. How is it that you've never had a discussion with your counterpart in Mexico about this? In fact, in Los Angeles Times article dated September 19th of this year, quote, at no time did we know or were we made aware that there might have been arms trafficking permitted. In no way would we have allowed it because in an attack on the safety of Mexicans. It goes on in the article, actually the paragraph before, and to this date, she said, U.S. officials have not briefed her on the operation gone awry, nor have they apologized. What is unacceptable is that you and everybody in your organization According to you, the higher-ups know about this investigation. You don't have 15 minutes to pick up the phone, and we have still never talked to these people in order to solve this problem because, as you say, it's going to go on for some time.
We have taken steps, I have taken steps to solve this problem in that I've ordered an examination of this to determine exactly what happened. I have issued directives that this should never happen again. We have put in place measures at ATF so that this kind of thing won't happen again. What Todd Jones has done with regard to the reforms that he has put in place, I think, are going to be extremely effective. And I've made personnel changes with regard to...
You haven't fired anybody. Nobody's been fired.
The gentleman's time has expired. Does the gentleman want to respond to the last question?
I just was trying to say that I have made personnel changes with regard to the agencies that have been involved, and these are initial determinations that I have made. It is not all that I am possibly going to do. There is an impatience here, and in some ways I understand it, but the reality is that you have to do these things on the basis of evidence, on the basis of findings that are factually grounded, and when I am in that position, I will take the appropriate action. But I want to assure you and the American people that people will be held accountable for the mistakes that were made in Fast and Furious.
Okay, thank you,
Mr. Chairman, point of inquiry.
Thank you, Mr. Chaffetz. Who seeks to be recognized? Gentleman from California.
A point of inquiry. Do political appointees of the President's and the Attorney General serve at the pleasure of the President or the Attorney General, or do they need to have to be fired for cause?
That is not actually a parliamentary inquiry, though.
But I'm sure
though it may be a legitimate question.
Thank you, Mr.
The
Chairman.
Judiciary Committee will recess until immediately after the series of votes. We expect that to be about 2:30.
Other stuff to talk about. Maybe you should hold on here. Turn this down. So Holder flopping around, crazy. It's just so it's hard to watch. Almost the guy's just so full of shit.
Yeah, I definitely heard a few audience members laughing,
gasping, laughing. Yeah. Well, and I have another clip that we could watch of him being grilled some more, but it's another 8 minutes. I don't know if we want to watch another one of those. We can move on to another issue because it is getting, it's already 50 minutes after the hour.
And then people can check
Exactly.
it out later.
And in fact, I have a whole listing of all the videos laid out, and we'll immediately, as soon as we're done here, do that.
Cool. I have some listings too. For
Yeah,
the
I
show
know.
notes from
And
my studies.
People are saying that the clips are making them angry, and they make me angry too. And that's why I wanted to show them to you guys, just because it's so infuriating to watch these government officials who are supposed to be representing us and taking care of things. These guys are they're just full of shit completely, and they're not. They don't answer to anybody. They're not transparent at all. They don't do what they're supposed to do. It's horrifying. Smoke some more. People are, well, we should probably do that as well. All right, so we're going to move on to another couple video clips. Now, this story gets crazier because not only are they running guns down to Mexico, they're also, or do you want to do the Occupy thing now, or should we go on to that? We'll do that after. We'll go straight into
we'll
this.
do that at the end of the show.
Okay. So not only are they doing the guns, but they're also helping the gangs launder money, millions and millions of dollars of it. And it just came out in the New York Times, and it was a couple agents who I guess are retired or not going on the record, and a couple who are still part of the agency have come out now. This is the DEA saying that they help launder this money for the Mexican cartels as a way to track them and to find out who they are. But you know, again, it's one of those things. How long do you track for? How long are you helping them? Is this going to kill people and that kind of thing? These are paying for government informants, millions of dollars, taxpayers. It's crazy. Like, they actually pay all these informants. It's also come out, besides the fact of helping them launder the money, but they actually pay these informants to go out there and carry guns given to them by the U.S. government and to be working as part of these gangs. And they're like double agents, right? Supposedly double agents. Now, one of the reasons that Celerino was put away, we think, was because he was very honest about all the inner workings. And what he said, and you can find this on the front page of Cannabis Culture, is that Calderon is working with the Sinaloa cartel. El Chapo, who is the leader of the Sinaloa cartel, was a supporter of Calderon, Felipe Calderon, who's the president of Mexico. And according to Celerino, he said that the Mexican army was rented out to the Sinaloa cartel to fight the Gulf cartel, and information was provided. And so they would go after these other cartels instead of the big one, and that's how they would, say that they were fighting it and have stuff for the public, but really they were part of one of the cartels. So this is what Celerino said before he was tossed away, and it makes a heck of a lot of sense. Of course, the government is going to, I don't know. I don't want to get too much into speculation, but obviously Mexico is mad about all of this. And here's a clip from the news about what they're demanding right now. Check this out.
Mexican lawmakers say they're furious. They're demanding an investigation after learning the DEA might have allowed its agents to launder money, possibly even on Mexican soil, as part of an investigation into the inner workings of Mexican drug cartels.
Muy mal, y esto nada está abonando a la confianza que
really bad, and this is not increasing the trust among countries to work together against crime.
Y más aún,
Furthermore, you can't fight crime by committing criminal acts and violating the law.
Last weekend, the New York Times reported that Drug Enforcement Administration agents have handled shipments of hundreds of thousands of dollars in illegal cash across borders.
Of course, there's a jurisdiction problem, and in the end, maybe a violation of sovereignty. That has to be determined and find out where the operations were carried out.
A former DEA agent says infiltration of Mexican drug cartels is not only happening, but it's essential in investigations aimed at dismantling Mexican criminal organizations by targeting their finances.
There's only one way, really, to catch these major drug cartels, the leaders of these cartels, and that's to follow the money. Because these leaders don't go anywhere near the drugs themselves. They hire people to do that.
In an email statement, the DEA said it would not, quote, discuss the operational aspects of law enforcement activities. It added, we have been working collaboratively with the Mexican government to fight money laundering for years. As a result of this cooperation, we have seized illicit transnational criminal organization money all around the world through our partnership with law enforcement.
The real question here is whether or not undercover agents need to sell drugs, buy drugs, launder money. And I've got to tell you, there's no way to make these kinds of great international sophisticated conspiracy cases unless you're going to do that.
Last month, the Mexican government requested the extradition of American ATF agents involved in Operation Fast and Furious. This operation allowed the legal smuggling of firearms from the United States to Mexico to learn about smugglers, but many weapons were lost and possibly ended up in criminal hands. Rafael Romo, CNN, Atlanta.
All right. So now, back on this side, or the U.S. side of the border, some more of these guys getting their ass kicked. And now this is Issa. He's a Republican, so he's got his Republican slant to everything. But this is another CNN clip. Check this out.
Here's a provocative question. Is an agency of the United States government using its power and your money to help Mexican drug cartels launder millions of dollars in profits? That allegation is being made now against the Drug Enforcement Administration as part of its program to try to track and crack the drug money trail. The New York Times reports it's very similar how it operates to how the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms permitted Mexican drug smugglers to buy American weapons through Operation Fast and Furious. That, again, program designed to learn more about cartel operations. Congress is investigating Fast and Furious, and now that investigation will be expanded to include these money laundering allegations. And the man leading that investigation is Congressman Darrell Issa. He's chairman of the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee. Mr. Chairman, thank you for your time tonight. You sent this scathing letter to the Attorney General asking questions about this program. He was supposed to brief your committee tonight, and he has testified tomorrow. Have they sent any materials up to you on this day that calms you down a bit, that answers some of your questions?
Not yet at all. As a matter of fact, the New York Times report, which is very disturbing, seems to be following the same pattern as Senator Grassley discovered nearly a year ago, and that is a denial and delay. They're saying there's nothing to brief, and they're refusing to brief us. But as you noted, tomorrow we'll have the Attorney General back, primarily to explain how he gave less than factual information, some would say false, or that he lied, but he clearly told us he didn't know about this program when in fact he did. He described weeks when in fact it was many months that he knew about Fast and Furious and did nothing to really bring that to Congress's proper oversight.
Well, let me read a bit from your letter. You write in this letter, the existence of such a program again calls your leadership into question. The managerial structure you have implemented lacks appropriate operational safeguards to prevent the implementation of such dangerous schemes. The consequences have been disastrous. I want to, Mr. Chairman, address your answer to a Democrat out there who says, here's a Republican on a witch hunt trying to get Eric Holder. Address your answer as to why you think he's not qualified or competent to be this nation's top law enforcement officer.
Well, John, as you might know, I have not called for his resignation. I've raised the concerns not just about Eric Holder, but about Lanny Brewer. Quite a while ago, the U.S. Attorney Burke, who did finally step down, Weinstein, a number of other, Hoover, a number of other individuals that we've found knew about this program and failed to stop it. We're not looking for political appointees. We're not looking for career professionals. We're looking for the many points in which a program that was destined to fail was put together and continued on for a long time, leading to the death of Brian Terry, and clearly in the neighborhood of 200 people in Mexico have died with these weapons, and more will die. It's the safeguards. It's all that, the management. Is Eric Holder ultimately accountable? Yes. Do I have confidence in him? No. But let's understand, there's a lot of other safeguards that failed, and our responsibility to the Democrats, as you said, is to make sure that the Justice Department fixes these, not for this administration, but for any administration. There should have been career professionals who put a stop to this, not just political appointees.
Well, let's talk about this money laundering case. Let me ask you just a yes or no question. In theory, it's a good idea for our Justice Department, our cops, to be trying to learn as much as they can about what the bad guys are doing and potentially getting involved in things like this. Yes or no?
Yes.
And so in this case, what do you think went wrong? And I want to read you a little bit from the New York Times article that lays it out. You have a former DEA agent that says, you know, you're trying to do this with as small amounts of money as you can, but it says they tell you to bring in $250,000 and they bring you $1 million. What's the agent supposed to do then? Tell them, no, he can't do it. They'll kill him, meaning you're trying to use a small amount of tax dollars as the bait here so you can learn, but sometimes it takes more, to my language, to play. Is that okay?
Well, the real question is not how many dollars. It is, how long do you let it go on? When do you roll up the intermediaries, the people you've trapped in a sting like this, and then use them, flip them, if you will, to be your operatives? Those techniques are well known by law enforcement. The real answer is you try to make sure no money, no guns, no drugs leave your control. And more importantly, you use people that you have credible, indictable evidence against to turn them to help you go up the chain, because ultimately you need insiders. You need people who are flipped. That process, we have oversight on judiciary. We want to make sure it works. In my case, when you have an out-of-control program like Fast and Furious, where 2,000 weapons went walking with no traceability, waiting to be found at the scene of murders, that shows they didn't use good law enforcement techniques and nobody put a stop to it. So is there a fine line of when do you use some of these things and track them? Of course. And we don't want to tie the hands of law enforcement. But when you see these kinds of abuses and then a cover-up, the American people have to ask, where are the safeguards, both with career professionals and with political appointees? That's our responsibility to do, and we're hoping the Attorney General begins to cooperate, where up until now justice has been delaying and denying.
You have a lot of questions about these programs, and you've uncovered a lot of things that are wrong about these programs. I want to ask you to try to set the scales for me, if you will, in terms of the Fast and Furious program and now this money laundering program. They're designed to track and to learn about the cartels. On balance, has the United States gained valuable investigative information and hurt the cartels, or are our tax dollars and the weapons and all that going in a way that the drug lords are benefiting from what we're trying to do to hurt them?
Well, clearly these weapons represented a net gain, a huge amount. Just one straw buyer bought 700 that passed into the hands of the cartel, far more than one would legitimately say you need in order to prove a case. The problem is, on balance, we are no better off in the war on drugs than we were at the start of this, and there have been no big wrap-ups of major cartels as a result of either of these programs. Having said that, again, we don't want to tie the hands of law enforcement. We want these safeguards to be in place. And when Attorney General Eric Holder says he wasn't informed, we have to ask, why is it all of his lieutenants very close around him, number 1, number 2, number 3 lieutenants, were actively involved, and yet Eric Holder says that he didn't know, and there's not so much as one email going from any of these individuals turned over to the Attorney General that we've been provided, so it looks like he's out of touch, like he's not able to manage or not interested in managing, and that is an important distinction.
We'll track the questioning tomorrow. Chairman Issa, appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. When we come back, if you go back to the spring, Michelle Bachmann was the rising star of the Republican race, but she has sputtered since. The question now, as Iowa prepares to vote, and she survived.
Crazy, crazy, crazy. U.S. government implicated in all kinds of shenanigans that directly lead to people's death. That's what's so crazy about this stuff to me, is what do they think is going to happen? They're making guns available, and then they're tied to them and responsible. Like, how did they think that this wasn't going to come out eventually? It's just insane. It really is insanity. Like, they're crazy or something.
Well, you know, prohibition itself is insanity. If you look at history, you look at the record, it causes more harm than good.
Yeah.
So I guess if you dedicate your life to an insanity, you just either have to get more twisted and twisted, or get out somehow.
Yeah.
And fortunately, some get out, and we hear about what's going on.
Well, and that's the thing, is that because they are part of what's going on, I mean, they're making the guns available, they're laundering their money. I mean, how far does it really go? And is this just the start of it? Maybe there's more. Who knows? Obviously, I mean, I think it's been going on for a long time.
Oh, for certain.
I wonder if we're going to see more as the dominoes fall on this one. I'm going to take this bong rip.
And
Marius, are you?
I gotta like this.
You got some more stuff too.
I like this joint.
Oh, I stole your lighter.
No worries. There's lots around. Thank you. We are friends with the Zeitgeist movement and Occupy Vancouver, and they've asked us to inform you of an action that they're putting on Monday, the 12th, and it's called Occupy the Ports. Apparently it's in support of longshoremen in the United States, and I'm not really up on the issue, but I do believe in the Occupy Vancouver movement.
Is this just in Vancouver, or is this all over the place?
If you go to occupyvancouver.com, you'll find out about the Vancouver action. It's apparently a 12-hour action, but I'm not sure exactly what time it starts. So you'll have to go there for more.
Check out occupyvancouver.com.
Yeah.
Occupyvancouver.com.
And yeah, I'm sure that there'll be other, if it's connected, there'll be other actions probably in the United States.
Well, I wonder what's
Los
going
Angeles,
on.
it's West Coast, it says.
I know that they've been getting their butts kicked as well all over the place. The Occupy movements, they've been shutting them down, pepper spraying people, tearing tents off of girls, leaving them in their underwear, and all kinds of crazy stuff. It's really horrifying.
Yeah, it's really ugly. Some of the footage. Democracy Now! Has been keeping really good track of it.
Yeah, Democracy Now! Is great.
Yeah,
I think that's the greatest broadcast news show in existence, basically, on a daily basis, 5 days a week. DemocracyNow.org.
From North America, you know, it's hard to say. Al Jazeera is supposed to be really good too.
That's true. Al Jazeera is great.
I haven't really looked at it.
Yeah.
So
it's one of the
good sources for certain.
I do have a soft spot for Alex Jones, though I don't agree with everything he says.
I've heard a few of his
Alex is crazy.
diatribes, and
so he said if Alex Jones was there, I'd be going crazy. I said he'd be having an aneurysm. Alex gets pretty emotional sometimes, but he's a great guy. Seems like he's really an honest person. That's what I like about him.
Definitely, and that's the best kind of person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, even if I disagree with somebody, it's there's worth in honesty.
Yeah, as long as they're straightforward. Even if they're out to get you, if they tell you that they're out to get you to begin with, at least you know what you're dealing with. So
exactly. All right. So, was there anything else that you wanted to talk about? I can't remember now.
No, I think that was it. The Occupy the Ports.
Nice.
OccupyVancouver.com, and I think that's it for me. Thanks.
Cool. Well, Bill C-10 back here in Canada has now passed through the House of Commons. thanks to the Conservative majority. So now, of course, it's going to move its way to the Senate, where Conservative lawmakers, some of them talking to the press, are saying that it could be till March when we see it actually become law, because the Senate, of course, is also controlled by the Conservatives. So they can basically do whatever they want.
Yeah. And they tend to, kowtow to the party that elected them, and most of our senators conservatives, as you said.
The Senate's different than the House in that the senators are appointed for life, and they're appointed by the Prime Minister and other politicians.
That's right. That's right. It's strange.
Yeah, it is
for a democracy to have something like that. But then we're a throwback from an English parliamentary system.
Yeah, they say that it's a second. I'm glad we have a Senate. I don't want them to abolish the Senate. I think they ought to change the Senate so that it was elected by a proportional representation. So you'd have
make a lot more sense.
Yeah. You'd have two levels of government, one elected by proportional representation, and then the other standard parliamentary system, which I think could also change in certain ways. Like, I don't like that when you have a majority, you can just basically have a dictatorship and put anything through anytime you want. I don't know, there's got to be some way around that. Even if it was the Liberal Party or the NDP in charge, total control over everything, do you want any party to have that anytime? Seems pretty crazy.
It's difficult to say, because if you don't have that kind of power, you have a quagmire and nothing gets done.
Right.
And then in the States, when you have a two-party system, well, the corporations and the special interests have infiltrated both of those parties.
Right.
So I think the question is to clean up politics before we can actually see which system is going to work.
Yeah.
Because what we have is just
that's not a lofty goal.
That
should be easy.
We've been working towards it for thousands of years. I feel that we'll get there one day.
Yeah, I'm not so sure, but I think we have to keep fighting for it anyway, no matter what we're ultimately going to get. So there hasn't, that I've seen, been a lot of television news coverage of C-10 passing in the House. I don't think I really saw any. I didn't watch the news on that night and see everything, but I watched the internet fairly closely. I'm sure they talked about it on the news at least a little bit, but there hasn't been much available online at all, even from the main sites like CTV and CBC, who often put up clips of their news coverage of issues. So I do have a couple of videos here. There's one of John McCallum, who's a Liberal MP, talking about the bill. This was just shortly before it was passed. And I kind of liked what he had to say. I'm not going to play the entire clip. I'm just going to play a part of it for you guys. But I did like what he had to say. And then I had another clip of an NDP MP, and I was going to play some of his stuff. Ryan Cleary is his name. But it didn't get loaded in for some reason, so I will put it in the show notes as well with the rest of them. In fact, I've already got that all set up for you guys. I just have to click the button and it'll be there.
Ryan Cleary from Newfoundland and Labrador?
You know, I'm not sure where he's from.
Okay. I think I saw that clip if it was on.
I think I did post it on the front page of Cannabis Culture.
Absolutely.
It was just briefly there for a few hours or something.
And definitely worth watching.
Okay, and so is this one, so keep watching.
Honourable Member for Markham Unionville.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm pleased to add my voice to the rising opposition to this bill, C-10, which perhaps is best characterized as the Conservatives' most recent piece of dumb-on-crime legislation. Mr. Speaker, our understanding of crime and the appropriate way to handle those who transgress the rules of our society has evolved over the past 400 years. We've moved from a time when criminality was commonly associated with witchcraft to a society that far better understands the root causes of crime and better ways to handle criminals. And I am truly dismayed to see our government completely ignore the work being done on these important topics. They seem to be taking us back to the Middle Ages. And, Mr. Speaker, that's not just empty rhetoric. Why do I say they're taking us back to the Middle Ages? Well, first of all, it's obvious that they care not a whit about policies to fight the ultimate cause of crime. Second, they don't care about deterrence. If they did, they would have paid attention to a recent study by their own Department of Justice that was released a week or so ago, which provided evidence that longer sentences are not an effective deterrent to crime. And indeed, the results from that study are consistent with international evidence on the topic. So if they don't care about fighting the ultimate cause of crime, if they don't care about deterrent, what's left? The only thing they care about is the principle of retribution or vengeance. And that is why I make the statement that they are taking us back to the Middle Ages. Ou en français,
or in French, what we can say is that the principle of fighting against the ultimate causes of crime, this is not at all important to the Conservatives, and at the same time, for the reasons that I've just expressed, the principle of deterrence is not important to the Conservatives. All that is important is the principle of vengeance or retribution, and that is in this direction that the bill is a return to the Middle Ages.
Would deny that protecting the citizens of Canada from harm is the most important objective of government. In fact, the government is granted a monopoly on the use of force for just that purpose. But with that power comes the responsibility to act in an appropriate manner that benefits society. Our country was founded on the principles of peace, order, and good government. And, Mr. Speaker, good government means examining all the facts, all the opinions. It means talking to experts and making public policy decisions that are based on evidence, not knee-jerk ideological desires. Good government also means respecting Parliament's role in public policy debates. My opposition to this bill stems from its ineffective and ideological nature and from this government's inability or unwillingness to work with Parliament on this major issue of public policy. I can already hear that familiar refrain from the other side, soft on crime, soft on victims' rights. Victims' rights and crime are very important, and I find the constant use of victims as a shield for this ideologically driven agenda to be offensive. I believe nobody in this House is opposed to supporting victims of crime. To suggest otherwise is simply insulting to the intelligence of Canadians. And indeed, I might mention the case earlier today, my colleague, the member for Mount Royal, when he has presented amendments that would strengthen the provision in this bill to support victims of terrorism and add to the remedies that they have against those who committed terrorism. It seems the government is not going to accept that amendment, but that's a concrete example of Liberals supporting remedies for those who are victims of crime or victims of terrorism. But I think, what does it mean to support victims of crime? It must certainly mean doing our best to ensure that crime doesn't happen in the first place, or that those who break our laws should be treated in a way that will minimize recidivism. That's how we stand up for victims, by working to ensure that we reduce crime as much as possible, and also through measures such as proposed by my colleague from Mount Royal. I've spoken about the Conservative crime agenda in general, but I also want to spend some time on this bill in particular. My primary concern with this bill, Mr. Speaker, is that it's fundamentally ineffective. According to Statistics Canada, crime is going down, both in volume and severity. This should be trumpeted as a success, Mr. Speaker. Crime is going down. Isn't that our objective? When the government should be standing up and saying, the evidence is saying our policies work. They instead say that they don't believe the statistics. They claim the numbers don't matter. But they do matter, Mr. Speaker. So here, for the benefit of my colleagues on the other side of this place, I will go over a few of the facts that they choose to ignore. As I said before, crime is down. Locking people up for longer doesn't necessarily make them less likely to reoffend. As I said just a few minutes ago, that is confirmed by a very recent study by the Department of Justice that was acquired through access to information. When we are dealing with young offenders, the negative effects of prison are only multiplied. What the government needs to understand is that this is not just liberal nonsense or lefty stuff on crime rhetoric. Look at our neighbors to the south. The U.S. incarceration rate is 700% higher than ours. 700%, Mr. Speaker. They very nearly reached a point where fully 1% of the U.S. population was in prison. And what did that mean for the U.S.? They continue to have higher crime rates than we do. They continue to spend billions more on prisons than we do. Some states, such as California, actually spend more on prisons than they spend on schools. Prisons are not the perfect solution to crime, Mr. Speaker. That is simply outdated 18th century thought and nothing more. For many criminals, prisons have not proven the palaces of reform that the Conservatives promise they will be. For many, it is simply a school for crime. Our prison system is already at its limit. This plan to dump thousands of new offenders into the system will simply break it. Low-level offenders will enter the system after convictions for petty crimes, and they will leave having made new criminal connections and having learned the skills of the trade. That should never be the outcome of our justice system. And despite all of this tough talk, one of the things you won't hear the Conservatives talking about during this debate is the mental health of our prisoners. It's widely understood by those who study crime that mental health issues are one of the biggest driving factors of criminal behavior. Taking care of the mentally ill among us has been a failure of all levels of government for decades now. As of 2007, 12% of the federal male prison population had a diagnosed mental illness. That's a 71% increase over 1997. And those figures are even worse for female inmates. Our prisons are not supposed to be substitute mental hospitals, Mr. Speaker. In fact, I struggle to find a worse place for a mentally ill person. Currently, Aboriginals are incarcerated at a rate 9 times that of non-Aboriginal people, and that, I believe, is simply unacceptable. Like most prisoners, they are in prison for non-violent property or drug offenses. Time and time again, we've seen that the solution to this vicious cycle is not more prisons. Mr. Speaker, I've covered some of the negative social costs of this dumb on crime agenda, but it's also important to talk about the fiscal costs. As you know, the opposition has been asking the government for detailed cost estimates for their crime agenda. We've received nothing from the government except empty rhetoric. This is unacceptable, Mr. Speaker. Parliamentarians are both policymakers and the ultimate keepers of the public purse. We have a right to know the costs of the legislation that we are asked to support. And there's another consideration, and I will borrow a term from American politics, unfunded mandate. Yes, there will be significant federal costs, but we can't ignore the impact these changes will have on provincial governments. These legislative changes, taken in concert with previous changes, will lead to many new provincial inmates, a cost borne solely by the provinces. So this government has shown little respect for Parliament and its role, and it is also showing very little respect for provincial governments and their budgets. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? Question et commentaire.
The Honourable Member for Alfred Perrin. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I thank my colleague for having shared his thoughts with us on the Conservative government's bill that they are presenting to amend the criminal code. I'd like to add my colleague, because we heard a bit earlier, according to my colleague across the way, on legislation and the marijuana plants. It was said that 6 plants could be the equivalent of hundreds of joints, and therefore that could be major smuggling. And so when people have, when they sell to others, usually it's in bulk. So, I mean, I'd like to know what he thinks about that part of the legislation. In his opinion, is it logical to consider that 6 plants would be the equivalent of that kind of an offense?
Merci, Mag.
I thank my colleague for her question. And I'd make 2 points. First of all, in theory, there's the principle, rather, of mandatory minimums. And it's scattered throughout this bill because people think that, some people think, like as I do, that the judge should have the discretion. But this mandatory minimum really can have indeed the opposite effect as that intended. So we oppose that principle in the case that she mentions, but also in general. In my opinion, 6 marijuana plants is not a huge amount. But in more general in terms, as I said, we oppose mandatory minimums in general. Thank you.
My comment there. The honourable member for Fort McMurray, Athabasca.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I listened to my friend across the way intently. I am a part of the Justice Committee, and I want him to know that I am interested in what he has to say. But for the most part, he's talking about costs to implement the bill. And I'm wondering if he has had the opportunity to speak to victims and to ascertain the costs if this bill is not imposed, if we continue to have the high amounts of violent crimes in this country, if we continue to have loss of property through damage committed by youth, if we continue to have psychological damage to individuals for treatment. And Mr. Speaker, the cost to society as a whole when some crime gets out of control, has he looked at those costs, the real costs that victims are concerned with? They're not concerned with the cost of implementing this bill. The only time they're concerned with that cost, Mr. Speaker, is when they aren't actually affected by any crime. And, Mr. Speaker, we've heard from Canadians. They're impacted by crime, they want it to stop, and they want this bill and these laws to go forward.
Honourable member for Markham Unionville.
Mr. Speaker, I don't accept this principle that the Conservatives have a monopoly about caring about victims. Our view is that this bill will create more victims, because when you send young people into jail, they learn to become criminals. They go out, they're more likely to reoffend. The Department of Justice has itself said that longer sentences don't deter crime. So the best way to help victims is to reduce crime. And the central point of my remarks is that this law will not reduce crime. It is more likely to increase crime, and that cannot be good for victims. And finally, my colleague from Mount Royal has proposed amendments to this legislation which would strengthen the provisions that would help victims from terrorism. So if the government cares about victims, I hope they will accept the amendments proposed by the member from Mount Royal.
Hear, hear. We have time for one short question. L'honorable député.
The honourable member for La Salle-et-Mar. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to ask my colleague from Markham Unionville to talk to us a little bit about the situation in the province of Ontario in terms of crime, because we have heard from government members about what's happened in their ridings. They testified as to what they heard from various Canadians. But I'd like to hear what he's heard in Markham Unionville and also from Ontarians in general.
Merci,
I thank my colleague for that excellent question. I'm very lucky in the sense that Markham is a part of the region of York in Ontario, and we have a crime rate that is one of the lowest in all of Canada. The police are very effective, and this is a very multicultural community that I have in my riding. The chief of police has many connections with the various cultural communities, and therefore I believe that it's a system that works very well now. Certainly in my riding, we don't need this bill.
Before we resume debate, I'll need to tell the honourable member for Fort McMurray, Athabasca, that I'll need to interrupt him in about 7 minutes into his speech. This is for, of course, statements by members. The honourable.
All right, so that continues on for a while. These will all be in the show notes for you guys. Let's see here. Yeah, so that was pretty good, actually. John McCullum, he's a Liberal. I didn't really like him when the Liberal government was in. I remember seeing him and often being angry with the things he was saying because I wasn't a huge fan of the Liberal government in Canada before. But the Liberals these days have been saying a lot of the right things, at least on this issue, under Bob Ray, who's the leader now. Iggy was not, in my opinion, a very good leader for the Liberals. I like Bob Ray a lot better. Yeah, he seemed to be a lot more sensible on certain issues. But of course, it seems like whenever any party gets to be the governing party or even the second opposition party, things change a lot. And I think even the NDP, who were very radical before and were always on top of issues, I don't think I saw a press release on the NDP's federal website about Bill C-10 passing. There was one on the Liberal site. There wasn't one on the NDP's site. I'm not really sure why. I know one of the MPs did talk about it just after it happened and attacked it just with a few quotes. But they haven't released an official statement that I saw on their website in the press releases. I could be wrong. I haven't checked for a few days. So that was like, several days ago now, I guess, three days ago or something. But I'll go check that again and find out. Anyways, let's see here. I'm going to play you guys. Well, the last thing I'm going to play for you, maybe we should smoke another bong rip. Do you want a bong rip?
Oh, sure, love one.
You should have a bong rip. All right. Yeah, and I know the parties, like, the NDP have a lot of MPs in right now. They make up a good portion of the official opposition. They could really come out and say a lot, be very powerfully against this, make a big, huge deal about it. That's all they could do. They can't do anything about it in the House, really, because they don't have enough votes to do anything about it, even with the Liberals and the Bloc or whoever. But that's what the problem is. The Conservative majority allows them to just do whatever they want. But they can make a big fuss about things, and in fact that's what they're supposed to be doing, is the official opposition, is making life hell for the Conservatives in the media and the press while they go ahead and do all these horrible things that are actually turning Canada into hell if they really implement everything they say they're going to, which I'm not convinced that they'll be able to. I don't know if anybody saw this week, the police chiefs came out and supported Bill C-10, but at the same time they said they didn't think that it was good to just support it. They said they wanted a balanced approach where they weren't throwing people in jail who didn't need to be in jail, and he was saying things like, you can't arrest your way out of problems and that kind of thing. So, and there's some of those articles on the front page of Cannabis Culture. Check them out. Yeah, that's interesting that everybody's coming out against it, even the police chiefs, the Bar Association, all the people who work with criminals, like the John Howard Society. So a lot of the experts. All right, so how was that?
It was great.
Marijuana Man said this was like some 2-year-old bud or something. I don't know if that's what he really meant, but
perhaps.
He
said it would still get us high.
Right. I hope so. It seems to be working because I'm pretty high. We've been smoking it for a little while now.
Definitely.
What's everybody smoking out there? I don't know what I'm smoking. Haha, my mom likes your bong, Jeremy.
Is that Princess?
Wow.
Is that one Princess?
I like it too. It's nice. You can get one of these down at 307 West Hastings. Tell your moms.
No, it's not Princess?
This is Princess, yeah.
Oh, it is.
This
Okay,
is Princess.
okay.
Yes, it is.
Sorry.
Yes. I always say the other Princess. Given to me by Mel Hempseed Adams. She's a beauty.
Yeah, she's a sweetheart.
She is. No,
Very,
I mean the
very
bong.
Nice. I was talking about the bong.
Yeah.
No, I wasn't. I was talking about Mel. Hi, Mel, if you're watching.
They're both pretty cute. So, all right. We smoked enough weed, didn't we? And what time is it? 5:20 already. My goodness. Well, the next video that I'm going to play for you guys is another. It's like, I'm going to be honest with you guys. It's 18 minutes long. But if you guys want to see a lot of information about Bill C-10 and what it means and a closer analysis, I thought this would. Pardon me. Wow, 2-year-old weed. It's pretty good stuff.
Yeah.
What the hell's burning over here?
I don't think I totally finished my bong rip, so it's we have incense.
So this is okay. The Canadian Awareness Network. Now, I was not entirely familiar with these guys, but I'm looking at their website right now here, CanadianAwareness.org. and it looks like they're an alternative news network based in Canada or something, and they're like New World Order fighters, I guess, because I see some stories on the front page, so you kind of know where they're coming from. But this is actually a really great little segment about Bill C-10. It's 18 minutes long, but the production values could be a little bit better in some spots, I have to admit, and the narration could probably be read a little bit more clearly. But I thought it was pretty good, and it contained a lot of the clips that some of the clips that I played on the show before from the Texas lawmakers who came out and said that C-10 was a bad idea in that CBC special they did. And so they include some of those clips and they talk about some other stuff. So I thought it was kind of cool. I'll let you guys be the judge of what you really think of it. And yeah. So this is if you don't know about
implemented.
Yeah, well, and that's really what it comes down to now. I'm not, the Senate is obviously conservative. They're probably going to go ahead and pass it, so we could be in for some trouble. But again, maybe the cops will be as cool as the Vancouver cops and make it a low priority, or at least seemingly make it that way. And who knows?
Well,
I'm hoping. You never know. What else can we hope for?
It'll be city by city, I'm sure, because the Vancouver police certainly have a different attitudes towards marijuana than, let's say, the Toronto police,
right,
or even Montreal.
Yeah.
And I'm not too familiar with what the other cities do, but I know that Vancouver has been extremely good to our community as far as
Vancouver.
We're practically decriminalized in many ways.
Well, yeah, and I guess it depends, though, because they seem to bust a lot of people on the SkyTrain, but not anywhere else in Vancouver or something. Yeah, at least according to those statistics that the Vancouver Sun published.
Well, people tend to deal openly outside SkyTrains, and they do deter people from standing on street corners and openly dealing.
Interesting. I hadn't thought of it that way.
If you deal from your apartment, unless you create a lot of heat or unless you get some sort of neighbor's complaint, you're pretty safe. So from the dealing situations that I've seen.
In Toronto, the police smoke your pot.
It's just the apparent, the outdoor, the person who's trying to make a quick buck that they're busting.
Yeah, and somebody in the chat here, Cleveland cops are short of completely intolerant. Yeah, I know some places they're really tough on pot smokers in smaller towns and things like that. They go after them a lot because they're probably bored and have nothing to do, right?
Here.
Yeah.
I'd love to go traveling, but then I like to have my pot with me. It helps me enjoy my day better. So why would I want to go somewhere and be all nervous and sketchy? It would be nice if worldwide things were sane.
You can't live your life in fear. You can't let the terrorists win.
It's absolutely true.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, we're going to wrap this up, and we're going to play this for you guys on the way out, and enjoy Bill C-10. So, yeah.
Do you want to tell them about next week a bit?
Oh, yeah. I guess
we're going to have a face-off. And
that's right. We'll see how it goes. I'm working on right now. It's not 1,000%. It's not even 100%.
Oh, sorry if I didn't.
But it's okay because we're negotiating, so it should be okay. In one way or another, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if they'll both be live in either on the phone. I may have to record a segment with one of them if they can't do it at that time.
Right.
But I'm hoping to have Donald McPherson from the Canadian Drug Policy Coalition on the show.
I talked about them last week.
Right, exactly. And also Dr. Evan Wood from the Stop the Drug.
Safer.
Right. Or sorry, Stop the Violence BC is their organization.
Oh, sorry. No, I keep mistaking those two.
Yeah, Stop the Violence and right.
They both
Dr. Evan Wood, he's
great.
Same
time.
And so it's not 100%. We're still in negotiation, but I hopefully will talk to both of them and encourage them to come on the show next week. So I'm working on it.
Hopefully, if all goes well.
Yes. All right. So, anyways, we're nice and high now.
Yeah.
Hope you guys are too, and enjoy this, and we'll talk soon, guys. Thanks for watching, as always.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great weekend.
Peace.
Mr. Day, you told Theo a moment ago that you didn't want to send, the government doesn't want to send confusing signals to Canadians and to markets about its commitment to cutting the deficit. At the same time, during a time of declining crime rates, you want to blow $9 billion on prisons. If that's not a confusing signal, what is? Why do you expect to be taken seriously as a deficit fighter if you're prepared to do that despite the absence of any need?
We're very concerned, Terry, about the increase in the amount of unreported crimes that surveys clearly show are happening. People simply aren't reporting the same way they used to.
Brian Mulrooney, good evening, sir.
Good evening, Lloyd.
So good to hear from you. So what's your take on the way this is turning out tonight?
Well, I think warmest congratulations to Prime Minister Harper. He will be the first Conservative leader in 50 years since Mr. Diefenbaker to win a majority and 2 minorities, and that's a tremendous accomplishment.
You've just won one of the biggest electoral victories in your party's history. You are a majority government winner, and in the process have decimated both the Bloc Québécois and the Liberal Party so badly that their leaders have decided to resign. So how do you celebrate that victory?
At the same time, look, it feels great, but at the same time, I am very much aware of the immense challenges that lie before us in the government and the responsibility that this office carries with it.
Bill C-10 is made up of 9 previous bills that have been introduced in the last 5 years, all of them being shot down. Now Harper, with his majority government, has lumped them together. The mainstream media in Canada has named this bill the omnibus crime bill, for good reason. It is going to change how the criminal system works in Canada. It's going to change it to a system that's been used in Texas for a long time now.
The state of Texas earned its reputation for tough justice. For years, Texas led the United States for the number of prisoners and the number of executions. Texas has hundreds of prisoners on death row. And until 2005, Texas had the highest rate of incarceration in the world, with fully 1 in 20 of all its residents locked up. In the 1990s, when these scenes were shot by the CBC, Texas prisons filled to bursting. Most prisoners didn't even have cells, just a cubicle and a bunkhouse crammed with 30 men at a time. Yet the crime statistics were worse than those in other states.
Hold on a minute. California, Texas, and many other states have tried this approach before. And they've spent billions of dollars of tax money. Crime rates steadily increased.
Well, the first thing you learn in a Texas courtroom is that the popular image of tough Texas justice is out of date. Yes, for years they built more prisons and they stuffed them full. But then they got the bill. And Texas, yes, even Texas, reversed course. What they did was put fewer people in jail. Over 5 years, the rate of incarceration dropped by 9%. At the same time, the FBI says the crime rate dropped by nearly 13%.
In 2005, when they changed this, they started helping the citizens that were arrested instead of treating them like garbage and putting them off to the side. They saved billions of dollars in tax money, and it was more effective.
But B, you can do it, girl, ladies and gentlemen.
It worked for people like Elizabeth in Dallas. she quit drugs and crime when Judge Crusoe told her she had to or go to prison.
All righty, congratulations. Proud of you.
Thank you.
Great job.
But to everybody, I encourage you to don't give up, put your head up, and we know that we can do it successfully without nothing. Thanks. That's all I have to say.
Elizabeth has smartened up, and experts here say so has Texas.
What happened in Texas is we did, for a number of years, have very strict sentencing.
Dr. Teresa May Williams oversees a drug treatment center near Dallas, where inmates spend long days and months kicking their addictions. The state funds it because the old lock-'em-up policy threatened to bust the Texas budget.
The war on drugs was to reduce if we reduce the demand, we're going to reduce the trafficking, we're going to reduce crime. Well, that blew up in Texas's face, California, and several others. So what we saw is our prison populations quadruple. And on top of that, the dollars that were going into prisons across the country and in the state of Texas went up billions and billions of dollars.
Drug treatment, she says, is both cheaper and better because graduates are less likely to commit new crimes than if they just go to prison.
What happened if we just send those individuals straight to prisons, straight to state jail? We just sentence them. We don't look at the drug problem. The data showed that 60% of those individuals will be out and committing a new crime in, on average, about 11 months. The recidivism rate for probation, the same kind of offender, is somewhere around 15 to 16%.
So they reoffend at 1/4 the rate of ex-prisoners.
And in the first time in Texas history, they actually closed prison.
If you bring 3,000 prisoners back less out of parole, or 4,000 or 5,000 people less out of probation, I mean, that gets rid of that increase. And this session, for the first time ever, Texas closed a prison. Closed a prison. We closed one. First time in our history.
It was historic. After 100 years, they shut the Sugarland prison, where Huddy Leadbelly Ledbetter once sang about watching the train, the midnight special, from his cell. Now they don't need the prison. The last inmates are cutting up the bunkhouses, and the state will sell off the land, all of which has other states looking to copy Texas.
What's the deal here? Our crime rates are at their lowest level since the 1970s. And our government now wants to follow a failed model?
The Harper government wants to increase maximum sentences and set more mandatory minimums. Texas did neither. To require more prison terms for drug crimes and allow fewer conditional sentences like house arrest. Texas is doing the opposite.
Combined, these measures will strengthen our justice and immigration systems and will have a significant and positive impact on our ability to keep our citizens safe.
In Texas, they are pretty blunt about the Canadian plan.
The public has a right to expect that criminals will be off the streets. This is the argument made by the current government in Canada, for example. What's wrong with that argument?
Nothing. If you don't mind spending a lot of money and locking people up and seeing your crime rate go up, there's nothing wrong with it.
Why would the crime rate go up?
Well, because it did here. Because what you do is you put them in and they're going to come out, and they're not going to come out any better than what you put them in. And you'll probably see the same thing in Canada that we saw here.
Under the Tories' omnibus crime legislation tabled Tuesday, a person growing 201 pot plants in a rental unit would receive a longer mandatory sentence than someone who rapes a toddler or forces a 5-year-old to have sex with an animal. Producing 6 to 200 pot plants nets an automatic 6-month sentence, with an extra 3 months if it's done in a rental or is deemed a public safety hazard. Growing 201 to 500 plants brings a 1-year sentence, or 1.5 years if it's in a rental or poses a safety risk. The omnibus legislation imposes 1-year mandatory minimums for sexually assaulting a child, luring a child via the internet, or involving a child in bestiality. All 3 of these offenses carry lighter automatic sentences than those for people running medium-sized grow-ops in rental property or in someone else's land. A pedophile who gets a child to watch pornography with him, or a pervert exposing himself to kids in a playground, would receive a minimum 90-day sentence, half the term of a man convicted of growing 6 pot plants in his own home. The maximum sentence for growing marijuana would be double, from 7 to 14 years. The same maximum applied to someone using a weapon during a child rape, and 4 years more than someone sexually assaulting a kid without using a weapon.
Will reinstate anti-terrorism provisions that expired under a sunset clause in 2007. The measures provided for a 3-day detention without cause, known as preventive arrests, when it is believed that such action will prevent an act of terrorism. A suspect may also be compelled to disclose information to a court in relation to possible terrorism, even in absence of a charge. Ottawa's intention to adapt principles of deterrence and denunciation when it comes to sentencing teens makes no sense to Judge Jimmy Edwards. His Chief Justice of the Juvenile Division of Missouri, otherwise conservative state that for half a century has focused on diverting youth from the prison system and rehabilitating the ones that are incarcerated. Now the Missouri model is being adapted elsewhere. Quote, "I don't think it deters anything," he said. Quote, "You have to look at what type of community are you building by constantly sending kids to jail." Okay, so what is the deal here? Our crime rates are at their lowest since the 1970s, which shows that our justice system is doing its job. And we are now going to follow a model that has been proven to be a total failure at all the cost of the taxpayers, in the tune of nearly $20 billion just to start with. We're building new jails and the cost of the bill.
Under previous trade agreements and the new North American Security Perimeter Deal, nearly everything between Canada and America has been harmonized. Now, with Bill C-10, the Canadian legal system will also be more Americanized, along with the privatized prison programs.
Criminologists and prison guards say the actual result of the Harper crime package will probably be not safer communities, but rather private prisons in which the bottom line is king, not inmate rehabilitation. With 5 to 10 years needed to build a new prison from conception to construction, coupled with Harper's ideological predisposition to outsourcing government programs, Jones said it's not a big leap to privatize prisons coming to Canadian in a big way. Quote, "Our anxiety, they're going to grow the prison population so quickly, they will be left with few options."
Creating a crisis to push through a controversial change is straight out of the playbook of Mike Harris's Conservative government in Ontario, when it privatized one of Ontario's prisons. NUPGE's Bush said the strategy of the Harris government was to create a crisis and bring privatization forward. To deal with the crisis, he said, you take an overcrowded situation, add more people, and you create a crisis. We were hoping the experience elsewhere would have taught them. And what does a private prison system look like?
I was raised believing that incarceration was expensive to the taxpayer. It was not in anyone's best interest to lock someone in a cage unless it was absolutely necessary. In the mid-1980s, a law was passed that allowed privately owned corporations to build and operate prisons.
I'm a real advocate of private prisons, having privatized half the prisons in New Mexico. And the reason for doing that is the same goods, same services at a third less the price.
Have we reached a point of building so many prisons that the purveyors are now looking for ways to keep them all full?
Here's the way a private prison works, okay? You pay somebody to build a fancy cage. Then you fill it up as far as you can get it, which is pretty full. full of people that the people that built the cage get paid $40,000 or $50,000 a year to just keep in the cage.
You have corporations like Wackenhut, they just changed their name, Corrections Corporation of America, that house prisoners, nonviolent drug offenders. As a matter of fact, I think 60% of the increase in prison population under Bill Clinton, which was like 1 million people, of the 60% of that new prison population are nonviolent drug offenders.
Now, if you've got 5,000 people in your cage and you're being paid $30,000, $40,000 a year for them, that's a lot of money. And if you can, on top of that, use them as your private property, as chattel property, that you can then make do work or produce things that you get paid for on top of that, what a great deal. Now, where I come from, when you transform a person into a piece of property, that's called slavery.
Not far from Bakersfield, California is a small town of Taft, once home to a thriving oil industry. But like so many oil towns across America, the oil finally dried up. Like many bankrupt towns, a private prison stepped in to save the day. The Taft Correctional Institution is owned by the Geo Group, formerly known as Wackenhut. Wackenhut changed its name after a storm of bad publicity.
The Geo Group is the leader in providing diversified services to government agencies around the globe. Our global expertise in outsourcing includes the design, construction, financing, management, and operation of jails, prisons, and special purpose institutions, and immigration and detention centers.
They trade their stock on Wall Street based upon the number of people that are in jail. If that isn't sick, if that isn't the best definition of sickness in a society, in a culture, in a civilization, I can't tell you what is.
Less rehabilitation, higher crime rates, and increased profits for large corporations is what we can expect to see. This is just the beginning of the coming police state.
This is our country. This is our future. Stop Bill C-10.